Welcome to Fireside Chats with Mats. So, today I'm also probably going to be talking about fighting games, but this time it's actually about the. See, fighting games, I think they're actually very indicative of a lot of things because fighting games are very concentrated. They are similar to racing games or shoot 'em ups, which are also seen as sort of difficult and more pure gameplay types of games. Fighting games are very to the point. You have two fighters generally. One guy is you, one guy is your opponent, and you have however many rounds, maybe 3 rounds. And if you beat them in 2 out of 3 rounds, you win and you fight the next guy. It's very simple. And in that simplicity, it's actually really great. Similar to a racing game or, again, a shoot 'em up game, it's very much like a test of personal skill. And every time you play, it's not so much about, really, it's not at all about gaining experience points and stuff. There's this guy who talks about fighting games on YouTube, Maximilian Dude, and he was watching a YouTube video by a guy who was in this video representing Kotaku, the video game website, I guess, and it was funny because they have both had very similar aesthetics and even kind of similar energies about them. These two people, and the guy who was watching the other guy's video said at some point, like the other guy said, like with fighting games, you can put in all this time, you can play them for hours and hours, and it's not like you've made any progress in terms of getting experience points and stuff, but, you will have maybe gotten better or not. And the other guy pauses the video and he comments that he's like, you should get experience points. And he seems like a pretty, you know, experienced fighting game guy, way more than I am probably. But it just strikes me as weird, especially him being that way, that he would say you should get experience points because fighting games, just like generally shoot 'em ups and racing games, they're not really about experience points. I guess racing games, if you get a faster car or something, that would make a difference, but it's still not about that. It's about your skill each and every time. If you play a racing game, many people might understand or know what I'm talking about when I say you could be in the fastest car in the game, and likely the other people have similarly fast cars, but even if they don't, if you're just like smashing into corners and like not playing well, then it still may be difficult to win. I guess if your car is that much faster than everyone else's, then you can just spend enough time to get past them and then sort of keep your lead somehow. But that's the thing about fighting games. It's very much, you can play 100 times in a row, and the person you're going against or the computer opponent, they're not going to play any easier on you, even if you've played for a million hours. It's either you've gotten better or the game is the same. So, you know, it's a cool thing. And with fighting games, especially like with Super Smash Bros. Melee, I remember this being really fun. But with fighting games, it used to be a lot of fun to see what characters they had and unlock new characters. But now, with the way that the video game industry is, and this probably sounds kind of generic, it even might sound kind of leftist of me, but I truly mean this. Now, and I think it's a huge difference, instead of games having all these unlockable characters that, like, whether it be racing games, this more racing or fighting, I think shoot 'em ups generally have like one ship that you have and that's pretty much it, but maybe not. But with racing games and fighting games, unlocking new characters or new cars and maybe even new stages or courses or whatever, that's a lot of the fun, and that was a lot of the fun. And like, especially again with like Super Smash Bros. Melee, which people might not consider like a quote unquote fighting game, but like or Mortal Kombat maybe, like it was fun to have the idea of like these characters aren't unlocked yet, but you can unlock them within the game. And if you play the game enough, like there are all these characters you can unlock, and it was a lot of fun. Nowadays, though, either a character will be only unlockable by actually paying extra money for them, which, whether or not you think it's greedy or something by the game publishers, what I will tell you is that's not value that's there in the game that you bought. That's value for extra money. So when you buy the game, like literally you didn't pay for that part of it. And so, but often enough in newer games, on the character select screen, they'll have these little images of characters that you could select if you pay more actual real world money to buy the characters. And it's like, okay, well, that's actually less value now because I'm looking at fucking characters that I would have to spend actual money for. So that would be, I would say that actually takes away from the value of your original purchase because it's basically an ad right in your face. And generally people might want an ad-free experience with something that they actually pay money for. So it's just an ad in your face. But then with a game like Street Fighter V, which was infamous for coming out very bare bones, and then they released, I think, Street Fighter V Arcade Edition to, add a lot more of the content that people might have expected. But now I went into Street Fighter V and I see all these, like, it seems like I have like maybe 10, 12 characters unlocked, maybe like 16 or something, but it seems like more than half. They said like you get 40 characters if you buy Arcade Edition. And so it seems like more than half of the characters are characters I'd have to pay money for. Or I can spend, like in the Star Wars Battlefront reboot, because the original Battlefront games are on PS2 and stuff, but in the reboot, you could maybe the reboot of Star Wars Battlefront was worse than Street Fighter is, it seems, because it's still like a game of chance. But if you played enough and got enough points, you could have a chance at winning like all the cool characters like Darth Vader and stuff. But somebody like did the math back then, and it was a big controversy because it would be like you'd have to play the game for like hundreds or thousands of hours to unlock these characters, or you could pay money for them. But if you didn't want to pay money for them, but you wanted to unlock these characters, in the old days, they would be unlockable not by money. Like you wouldn't have the chance to unlock them by paying extra money. You'd have to, do whatever in the game to unlock them. So generally, I think they would sort of make the game with that in mind and not have it take thousands of hours to unlock these characters. Have it be more of a skill-based thing. Like if you beat the game this many times, or if you get this good at the game in some way or another based on you doing something, then you can unlock all of these new characters. But nowadays, those new characters, they're not part of what you paid for. They are further purchases, and so the original game with the characters that you have, it's just whatever is right in front of you, because in the old days you'd be able to unlock these new characters within the game, but nowadays it seems like whether the time investment is so insane, like in the case of Star Wars Battlefront, or whether in the case of Street Fighter V, all these characters, I went online and I was like, how do you unlock Vega, one of the main fucking characters in the entire Street Fighter series? How do you unlock this basic fucking character? He's like fucking, he's not quite Luigi. I guess Ken would be Luigi, but he's like Toad or Princess Peach in terms of like being regular characters in the series, or like Johnny Cage. He's actually fairly analogous to like a Johnny Cage, and it's like, well, if you by the course of playing the game, you could unlock like two or three of these characters fairly easily, but that's like two or three out of like maybe more than 20 of them. And then after that, essentially people were saying like after that it's like you're better off paying money for them. So essentially they give you a screen with like maybe 40 characters. More than half of them are not unlocked, and to unlock them in the game, it's so, even for these like people who seem to be like pretty hardcore fighting game people, like people answering questions about this game online, it's like, no, these characters, you can unlock maybe two or three of them with the amount of time that you're going to play the fucking game, but more than half of the characters that are shown on the fucking character select screen require an additional money investment. So essentially, let's consider this like buying another game. Because you bought the original game, right? You paid the money for the original game, so you have it. essentially this is like buying a new game. You have to buy a new game to get these characters. And it's like, Matt, no, you don't have to buy a new game. You just have to buy those characters in the game you already have. Again, I would say that's actually worse for the game I already have, because now they're showing me stuff that essentially it's not intended that I unlock in the game. It's sort of more realistically intended that I pay extra money for. So essentially, again, you're putting price tags in front of me in the game that I already bought, so that makes the game that I already bought worse. If I didn't see all these characters that it was more intended for, or more realistic for me to pay extra money for them in the game I already paid money for, then it would be like, okay, well, I know that Guile is not there, but at least it's like, okay, he's not just right in front of my face. But for them to put it in front of your face, it's like you bought a game and they're basically advertising. If you were to buy all these characters individually, I think they're basically advertising like paying for the equivalent of 3 more new games to get all the characters that they're just fucking showing you on your original game. But the thing is, it's even worse than that, because yes, you could still sort of go back to, okay, Matt, well, they're sort of money gouging people, and I don't like that term always, like money gouging. It's like, well, you know, unless you're the government, it's funny because like you often see people like on news channels talking about price gouging and stuff, but it's like, and of course the news channel people, whether or not you want to consider it this way, the news channel people sort of act as like a fourth branch of the government. Like they pretty much represent the government to the point where many of the news channels, even if they don't sort of say it directly or more directly, like your network channels like NBC, like nightly news and stuff, they represent the government and the mainstream narrative to the point where they'll actually uh, defame or denigrate people who go against the narrative, and they're actually the ones who should be fact checking things, and they're the ones who should be asking questions about the official narrative. But of course, instead, they'll make you look bad if you're asking questions about the narrative, to the point of sort of setting the government on you by having this whole idea of a quote unquote conspiracy theorist become something that now the government is actively looking for. I'm not saying it was the media who initially originated that, but they certainly worked to forward that perception of conspiracy theorists as bad people. If you ask questions about the common narrative, then you're a bad person. You're not a journalist whose job it is to ask questions about the common narrative, and we're not doing that. We're just giving you the common narrative straight from the government, generally not asking questions about it, and we support the government so much that generally we'll take either one side or the other in terms of this two-party political belief. Like literally many channels will either, you know, overtly or in some way maybe even unintentionally, and I do mean that, like maybe even in many cases unintentionally in one way or another, represent a certain part of the government over the other part. So they are literally playing propaganda for something over another. So all of this is to say, oh yeah. So all of this is to say, like, I'm not a big fan of the term price gouging, because usually I hear price gouging in a context where it's sort of easy to track it back to some sense of them trying to push public consent for further control of free markets by governments. And it's funny though, because it's like, you know, of course the government is the only group of people that are actually forcing you to buy something. It's like they're using violent force or the threat of it to to coerce you into paying money, or to just literally tax. They use the word tax, that's a euphemism, to literally steal the money from you directly and say, if you don't let us steal your money, we're going to come after you with jail time. So, like, they are the price gougers. They're the people who are doing it. But with video games, it's more an example of like back in the day. So you can look back at how video games used to be. You have an example of, here's a game that you would pay $60 for or $50 for maybe in the PS2 era, and say like Soul Calibur 2 or whatever a game like had characters you could unlock. Mortal Kombat Armageddon, Mortal Kombat Deception. You'd pay for a game, and if there were characters that were on your screen but weren't available yet, that was exciting. because that was fun because those characters were in the game, and if you do one thing or another, like it often took like a lot of effort to the point where like as a kid you'd often be like, oh, I'll never unlock Mr. Game and Watch or something, although I ended up doing so. But like, often but it was exciting because it's like, here's a challenge and then I can get this whole new character to play as. And often they'd put like a couple iconic characters as unlockables, and then they'd put sort of some of the newer characters as unlockables, or even some kind of boss type characters like Goro as an unlockable. But nowadays unlockables aren't fun because it's not a sense of like, oh, I see that character's grayed out on the character select screen here and it's going to be fun to unlock him, and oh, it's going to be cool when I have him. Now it's like, oh, so that character, even if you can technically do it in the game, generally the way to realistically unlock that character, unless you're going to put like 500 hours into this game to unlock more than like 2 or 3, however long it takes, that character is just another fucking price tag. And so you've already bought a game, but the game that you bought has extra prices in it, and they're going to actually sort of punish you by showing you this character that's not yours yet. And it is a punishment because it's like, hey, here's something that you don't have. You paid the money for this game, but you don't have this character. And we've made it either impossible to unlock them or so time consuming to unlock them that really the way to unlock this character is giving us more money. And again, I don't care about businesses charging people, or businesses setting even ridiculous prices for things. It's like, if you want to set a ridiculous price for something, if somebody agrees to pay for it, then in a certain sense that's what they thought it was worth too. But if you sell somebody something and then within the product you sell somebody, a lot of that is still locked from them, and it's not like hiding the parts that are locked or like saying, okay, well, you can go seek out another purchase if you want. It's like within that product there are other purchases staring that person right in the face pretty much every time they use that product and saying, haha, you didn't buy the whole thing. It's like, no, back in the day, if you bought a game, it was like $50 and generally, and you bought that game, and that's what it was, and then you got to play it, and it was fun to see the stuff that was still locked from you. Now it's not.